Welcome to the Cap Planner podcast, where we dive into the dynamic world of private capital markets. Whether you're new to private market investing or a seasoned professional, this podcast unpacks the latest trends, insights, and opportunities shaping the industry. Featuring expert guests and deep discussions, Cap Planner is your go-to resource for staying informed and inspired.
Welcome. I'm here with Morgan, sitting live from St. Louis.
Hello.
And hi, Coach Keren Eldad. So nice to see you again. The first time we met and the last time we were together, one and the same, was in Naples, Florida for a hedge fund conference. And I got to say, you got up on that stage and just really commanded an entire room, like to the point where I was like walking out of the door of the ballroom, and I stopped in my tracks and turned around and came and sat at a table to hear you speak. So
that says something.
Thank you. Shalom, Jody. Hi, Morgan. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this ever since I met you because I felt the same way about you.
Yeah, so fill us in on the Coach Keren, all of your
coaching business, the Gilded Age book for somebody who doesn't know you or who's not familiar and has not Googled you yet. Tell us who you are and what you do.
With immense pleasure. My name is Keren Eldad. I'm, as you can probably hear from my accent, Israeli, and I've been living in the United States for more than 20 years now. I've been an executive coach for 8 years now. This is my second career into which I pivoted after many years as a C-suite executive in the luxury industry and after being an officer in the Israeli army. And I have found sort of my calling through this because I've found my niche being the overachiever who is overwhelmed, stressed, and truly wants to maximize their potential, but also maximize their joy. And that's what Gilded is about. Gilded, my first book, which has a giant gilded cage on the cover, is an analogy or a metaphor for people who have climbed all the way to the top of their ladder and are starting to look around and feeling unsatisfied by what they see. There is something still missing. There's a relentless pursuit. There's anxiousness in their midst. They sometimes still have trouble falling asleep without worrying that the other shoe will drop. And I know, Jody, that to you, this is completely anathema to your
because I have trouble
soul.
going to sleep because I'm so excited to get up for the next day because there's so many good things to look forward to. So that's never been my issue, or I wouldn't say issue is not really the right word, but that really hasn't been top of mind for me. But I do appreciate that, especially when I heard you speak live, which was really impactful. And also watching, not only did I get to hear you speak, but I watched a room of hedge fund executives really put down their phones and stop working on their computers and lean into what you were saying. And then you further affirmed that because you said in one of our conversation as we were prepping for this pod that there were a lot of people who told you afterwards that it really resonated what you said. So I'd like to understand that a little more because you talked about a couple of things. And I think part of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, and Morgan and I talked about it, is that some of this probably your Israeli background as well, because Israel being such a small country and some of that scarcity versus abundance must have been a mindset that you cultivated through your life experience, both as an executive in the military.
No, absolutely. First, I want to say, Amichaya, you are very, very lucky to have this experience. It is a tremendous mindset to have. And even those of us who are privileged enough to be born with a preternatural tendency towards optimism or with absolutely wonderful parents who make us feel loved and trusted, even we can develop the anxious patterning. And that's why it resonated so clearly with those 55 hedge fund guys. This is a subtle but extraordinarily pervasive condition. And
Totally.
we know through research, there was an enormous
Morgan's
amount
had
of
it.
studies that.
Oh, I read parts of your book because you sent me the online version of it. And when I was looking through it, I was like, check, check,
Yeah.
check again. And I've been, you mentioned having good parents makes such a difference. And I've had not only the luxury of having a good mom, but I've also have really good grandparents.
Well, when Morgan would come up with this, I'd say to her, what are you talking about? Like,
Oh, yeah.
what do you mean you're anxious or you have some, you're nervous?
What do you mean you're worried? What is worry? Who
And
worries?
Morgan, how frustrating was that?
Oh, yeah. Well,
I know, because my
with
parents are
adults,
the same.
yeah.
I love them so much, but they were like, what do you mean you're stressed out? You're perfect in absolutely every way. Nobody could dislike you. And I remember looking at them going, What is your problem? And here's the deal. Overachievers, we get that praise from y'all and we start craving that praise. And then we start beating ourselves up when we do not uphold those perfectionist standards. And so that
Totally.
mindset, that scarcity mindset, believe it or not, can still creep in. And as a matter of
Right.
fact, as I was just beginning to say, there's bodies of research as long as the Nile to now confirm that overachievers are actually much more inclined towards anxiety and patterns of depression than the vast majority of the population. And it's because our standards are so high. And it's because we
Totally.
did, in many ways, win some lottery at birth. And that's who I'd like to deal with.
I
Yep.
also would love, though, for you, because you did touch upon this when you spoke in your presentation, and you'd put a picture of your dad up in basically a t-shirt, like a very understated,
Casual.
yeah, but there's a lot to be said about that. So fill us in on your dad, because he's a pretty
So
remarkable
I've
guy.
had really wonderful parents. My mother is absolutely adorable as well, but my dad is, I think, the cutest person who's ever lived. He was wearing a t-shirt in that picture that says, "I don't need Google. My wife already knows everything." And that is one of his more formal t-shirts. My dad is the most Israeli on the planet. As you know, Jody, even our Knesset members show up in short sleeves to
Yeah, very
parliament. Bibi
casual.
Flip
is
flops.
called Bibi. Nobody calls him Netanyahu. We call him Bibi. And so we're very informal by nature. And what I was trying to say by positing as him as role model was that while today I coach some of the most rarefied and prestigious appearing CEOs on the planet and executives on the planet, my dad has been a great example of leadership that is understated, that looks nothing like what you would expect him to present as, and that actually has been tremendously effective. He was the deputy foreign minister of Israel. He was an Israeli ambassador for a very long time. He was an officer in the army before that, and you would never know by looking at him. So the effectiveness of the image versus the effectiveness in person are two different things. And that's a message that I want to drill across to everyone who is so obsessed with perfection standards and results rather than in substance.
Right. Well, I really appreciate that also about your book and what you wrote for how things, when you're struggling as a person, and really also affects how you look outward and your in and what your take on the world is. Because if you're looking inside and you're very cup half empty or very negative, then your outlook towards other things are also going to be negative. And you talked a lot about how changing your perspective is really critical to uncaging yourself. So how do you work with clients in this way, or when somebody does come to you, how do you use that part of your book to really guide people?
Well,
And
also, how do you
yeah,
assess? How can you sum somebody up? I mean, I don't know if you do like a proper testing, or
how do you
Yes.
start?
yeah, how do you start? I come to you, I'm to be coached. How do we start?
First thing I want to say to Morgan's point is that success without fulfillment is ultimate failure. When someone is achieving the highest echelons of success, I have very big news, groundbreaking news to share on this podcast. And that is you should feel really happy. Your life should feel really good to you. And if it doesn't, something is off. And I use
Right.
two very important assessment tools, Jody, to assess where they in fact are. The first is a DISC assessment. It's actually called Trimetrics. It's a battery of three different assessments: Trimetrics, Motivators, and Acumen. They help us understand how people are making decisions at the moment, what their preferences are, and what their behavioral style is. The vast majority of overachievers, you should know, have extraordinarily similar profiles. I've come to call it a superstar profile. That's the first tell. The second tell is even more scientific, and it is my BS meter. My BS meter, because I coach coaches, I coach psychologists, I
Right.
coach people at the absolute top of their game, I coach politicians, even, which are the worst cases in the world, as I'm sure you can imagine. The BS meter for me is this wide, and I am showing on camera a teeny tiny dent between
Yeah.
my fingers.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
believe you.
you can smell when somebody's off. You can smell by just the way that they
Totally.
talk. It doesn't add up. Something doesn't make sense. The way they talk about their marriage is a little bit off. The way they
We
talk
call
about
that
their success is a bit
NQR,
off.
not quite right. You can
Yeah,
tell.
exactly. They're not quite right. They're probably just a little too confident. They're a little too
Right.
comfortable. Something's a little too glossy there. And then my job is to basically, like a loving, friendly trial lawyer, poke holes at it. And then if
Right.
you really are willing to have a moment in which you are honest, I have an in. If I
Yeah.
have an in, from that moment on, we can start taking you through my 12-step process. I like to call it, because, Alcoholics Anonymous has a 12-step process. I call it Workaholics Anonymous.
So funny.
Yeah, but you talk about that manifestation as well. So where does that
Yes.
fall into your, yeah, because I really like,
So
because I've been a big manifester over.
Jody has voodoo.
I think I see things. My mom has a little bit of that witchy stuff where, I'll give you an example of it, of the manifestation. My mom is really good at, she'll say something and then, or like, oh, I'm surprised you haven't bumped into so and so. And sure enough, a day later, you bump into so and so. Or,
Say
wow.
it and make it so
yeah,
type of
a
thing.
big say it and make it so, right. But even we were supposed to be on a business trip in Chicago this week, and I'm here sitting with Morgan in part because she broke her foot, and
Yeah.
we then up until last week the business trip was still on, and my mom kept saying, "I don't want Morgan to go. It's not going to work for her to go." And sure enough, the business trip got postponed, and my mother said, "I made that happen."
You
And I'm
probably did.
like, I
It's
bet you
clairvoyance
did.
and also anticipation. So yeah, manifestation is certainly part of the process because I like to say that I'm going to teach you how to get absolutely anything you want. And
Right.
I've certainly been particularly good at this in the last 10 years, so I feel like an authority on this. But the first thing we have to do is actually get you to admit that you have a problem. That's where that first component was so critical because if you don't say, there's something that's out of my control here, we can't really do anything for you. And then we start taking you through a process of essentially detoxifying your mindset, bringing your persona down to the studs so that you can truly be your authentic self and get back to your authentic preferences, your authentic purpose. And then from there manifest. Because Jody, if you're still manifesting from a place that is truly looking to appease the people around you to line up with society, then what is it worth? Who cares? I mean,
Right.
honestly, it
Right.
doesn't matter. I got married. I like to say this is my second marriage. I got married once. I manifested a tall, handsome, chest hair free Gentile that I always wanted to marry because I wanted to marry my Ken doll. But he was a terrible, terrible person. To
Right.
manifest just out
For
of a
those of
place
you
of
that don't
you,
know what a Gentile is, just so we're clear,
oh,
that's
a
somebody who's
Gentile
not
is a
Jewish,
non-Jewish person
right?
for
We're in the
anyone who hasn't
tribe
watched
here,
Seinfeld. Or hasn't lived in New York City.
right?
It's really interesting. You can. I'm sorry. I'm such an elitist. I assume everyone knows what a Gentile is, and it's a loving. It's not derogatory term.
No,
I,
No,
I really married that first, and I like to say that that manifestation was a manifestation, but it came from a
right.
place of such a lack of self-knowing and such low self-worth that
totally.
it manifested something terrible for me. By the time we get you to the section on manifestation, on teaching you how to get absolutely everything you want, you will manifest something that's truly aligned with your soul,
Well, that's
like
what you
my
said.
husband.
I mean, I listen to, I'm not as good. Morgan actually reads and has the patience to look at things and really,
Mm.
read a book and do all that. I don't have that as full attention. So I watch some of your YouTube clips and other things because the smaller bites are easier for me to digest. But that's where, when you talk about the manifestation, and I really love this, or it resonated with me, is that first you have to know what you want.
That's
And
right.
that means getting the bullshit out and making sure that you're being honest with yourself and that what you want is something attainable. Like it's like you were saying, if you want to be a billionaire, first you might want to figure out how to increase your, what you're making every month. And why don't you go for your first million before you're talking about being a billionaire?
It's step by step,
Step
and
by
it's a
step.
process. And I like
Exactly.
that about
And
your
actually,
coaching.
you're right. In other words, action talks and bullshit walks. They're very
Right.
different things. Manifestation can only align with the truth. And that's why we really need to get to the truth of who you are without the nonsense that your ego is playing on you.
Yeah. I want to circle back to what you talked about in your book about the abundance versus the abundance mindset and really against the scarcity mindset.
Scarcity.
Scarcity. My
We
God,
tried to
Jody told me it's five
practice
times. It's like Reese's. Rough. I can't. I can't. But I want to
scarcity.
know tell us what that means.
The scarcity mindset and the abundance mindset are the two most fundamental contextual concepts in all of coaching. They originate from Stephen R. Covey's work, a wonderful, wonderful book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It came out in the 80s. And essentially, this is what they posit. The scarcity mindset is the assumption that we are living in a world with finite resources and we are all competing for them. That means if Jody has Fendi heels, I have less Fendi heels. If
Right.
Morgan has deal, I have less deals. If someone else has client, I have less client. If you have
Right.
hot husband, I have less hot husband. The
Right.
abundance mindset is the opposite premise. It presupposes that the world has infinitely replenishing resources, and therefore we are not in competition for them. There is more than enough for all. And this allows you to be generous. This allows you to take risks. This allows you to love with all your heart. It is far more useful as a mindset.
I have a question as to whether this ties in. You told a great story when I heard you speak about Krug, the champagne house, right? Does this tie into it, or is it because
Yes,
you?
absolutely. So essentially, the abundance mindset, once you start to really adopt it, and I take time in my book to explain to you first how you can quote unquote buy this, and second, how you can start to implement it as your thought pattern, as your default for decision making. But once you make that implanted into your brain, it literally guides your decision making in business, and it can garner for you far above and beyond results. One of the best case studies ever is the story of Krug.
I
Krug
love
is a
this
champagne
story.
house. In the 1950s, it's a tiny little champagne house that is only serving nobility. So it's small, but it's mighty. Martin Chandon, those predatory poachers, they smell an opportunity. So they decide to enter the market with Dom Perignon at 3 times the price of Krug and at double the volume of Krug. On its face, it looks like Krug has only 2 options. One, lay down and die, right, Morgan? And number 2, match the price and match the volume. But because Krug is not a scarcity thinker, but an abundant thinker, they think, I smell opportunity too. And they
Right.
decide to make a step that can only come from an abundant, there's nothing but opportunity here mindset. And that is they 5x, their price, and they limit the quantity.
Right. They bring
They
it down.
halve it.
Right.
Right.
Totally. They
What
make
do
it
you think
special.
happened to Krug that year and in the 10 years after?
Oh, through the ceiling.
They threw the ceiling, sold
Yeah.
out every single year to the point where they got acquired by what is
Right.
now LVMH, Moet
LVMH.
Hennessy
You know,
Chanel.
but this comes up for us in business because Morgan, for years, even as recently as last week, says, would you consider putting some kind of endorsement, or what do you call it, a testimonial
On the website.
on the website?
Right.
And I'm like, no. Does Ferrari need a testimonial? Does
No.
Krug need a testimonial? No. Like, I think
I
differently.
don't even think I had the full sentence out of my mouth. She goes, She goes, no.
Never.
No, never.
It's not
She goes,
going to
I'm gonna
happen.
tell you
Can't
right
believe
now,
you said
no.
that. That's
Yeah.
a manifestation. That's a witchy manifestation too, because I was just on a consultation with a client before and they said, can you give us some case studies of when you've succeeded? And I was this close to saying, you're talking to our Ms. right now, so
Right. No.
we're
No,
good.
right. Right. No,
Look it
it's
up.
very true.
But yeah, I mean, this is not a question of faux humility or anything like that. This is really a question of, do I know what I'm doing? Do I not want to know what I'm doing? And the Krug case is very relevant, as is the abundance mindset, because as a result of all the anxiety patterns and all of the fear that do run for many of us our lives, we are unfortunately playing not to lose. We're playing defense instead of playing offense. And that is a huge,
Morgan
leaving
says
a
this.
lot of
This is
money
why I
on the
love you.
table.
I already know I love you because I just feel it anyhow. Like you're the type of person that when you get to be in a room and hear you speak, it does exactly that. Like you stop in your tracks. But the more you talk, you're the kind of person you just lean into, at least for me. And I'm just,
Well, it all makes so much sense.
yeah,
I mean,
it's amazing.
I think I always like when I started working with Jody in an official capacity, not just as her daughter, but as an actual employee of the company. I remember we had a conversation. I was like, we need to play offense. We're playing really good defense, but we don't want to play defense. We want to play offense.
Yeah.
We need to get the ball past the midline point and get the ball down the field. And it really was such a mindset change, which is really, I keep going back to your book, but all of this made so much sense to me because it's really a lot of where there are gaps. And I mean, for a person talking about perfectionism is probably one of my biggest faults. And that's really where you talking about it's so much of changing the mindset, making it so that struggles that come your way are opportunities to
Right.
grow and
We
to
love
be
that.
stronger, and taking minutes to pause and to respond, not react. All of this is really, and the fact that it is a logical program for people to actually be able to not just read the book, but work with you directly and have you as a resource and somebody on their team as their coach to help guide them.
Right. But you're working with the people at the highest
Right.
levels. Any parallels between that and when you were in the Israeli military?
You know, it's funny. I've been thinking about this a lot because I didn't mention until this year, until the book tour, that I was an officer in the army. And you know, these are tenuous times, so you have to sort of be delicate around it. But
Right.
I believe that that taught me everything I needed to know to be an executive coach. You are very, very young, and as a young person, to already be in a position where you understand that they have to take commands from you and that you have to have a distance between you and everybody around you, that there's a way to run things that is useful for people because you're trying to ensure their survival, was
Right.
extraordinarily beneficial to me. And the second thing that was, I really think I learned everything I needed to learn about life in the Army is there is something extraordinarily honorable about serving something so much bigger than yourself. I
Without
believe
a
that I
doubt.
serve God. And before that, I
Right.
served the great state of Israel. And I think that there's nothing bigger to in your life than having a higher purpose that's guiding you that is above and beyond that.
Right. You don't have an ego with it. I mean, you talked about that with your father
Yeah.
and his incredible role. He has no ego. He's just very authoritative and directive and knows, and you distilled that down. Okay, as we sort of hit the last chapter of our last section of our podcast, because we like to keep these things short and sweet so that people stay focused. Talk about your practice today and sort of going forward. I mean, it is tentative times or tenuous times. And some people are more nervous than others. Some, leaders and executives are very comfortable because they've had as Morgan knows, the
Experience
experience and the depth perspective, the optics to know, listen, things
goes up and
change.
down.
Yeah, but we keep moving forward. What is your sort of mantra for people going forward as they may have, with uncertainty?
It's exactly what you just said. It's things change, but we keep moving forward. Times of uncertainty have produced the biggest financial returns ever in history. Just look it up. Recessions are glorious for investors who are savvy and waiting. My grandfather, Warren Buffett, I love joking that he's my grandpa, is sitting on an arsenal of $300 billion right now, just waiting to pounce, just waiting to pounce. And that means he's seeing things in a different way. When you start learning how to read through abundance, you only see opportunity and how to go forward, how to become
Right.
truly resilient. So, in terms of my practice, uncertainty has made, I think, the deepest case for coaching yet. And I hope that that trend continues. Either way, it is a pleasure to serve, and I believe that right now it is a duty to serve because the more people come out of uncertainty and into clarity, the better
Right.
it is for society as a whole.
Yeah,
You stay the
without a
course.
doubt.
So do you have a next book? What's on the next
I do.
forecast for you? I bet you do, because
I
you're that
do.
type of
This is
person who
actually
can't
hot
sit
off the
still.
press. So we will in 2027 introduce the sequel, Gilded Relationships, because it turns out that a lot of people read Gilded and were like, well, I wonder if I could talk to you about my marriage. And I went, I think you
That's probably
can.
the one I need the more help on. The business is fine, but the personal stuff has been probably less my wheelhouse. So
Well, you
that
will
one I'll
get the
read.
first signed copy.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to hold you
First
to
edition.
that.
There we go.
Keren, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on, and we look forward to a continued relationship. Morgan?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you,
I'm
Develop. I
thinking
look forward to
everything
seeing
about
you
what you
both
said.
soon.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Karen. Coach Keren.